everybody. Welcome back to the Everyday Night. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jeff.
And Jeff, it's Women's History Month.
Has been, yes, for a couple
Yes.
of weeks now.
Yes. So it seemed appropriate to discuss the virtues and exemplars of the virtues who are women throughout history. But I think before we do that, we need to talk about why is there a Women's History Month?
Well, before we
And
talk about that,
yes.
let's talk about what are you drinking?
Oh, well, tomorrow is St. Purim's Day. It's actually Purim and St. Patrick's Day fall on the same day.
I've never heard of Purim. What's his
Purim,
gig?
Purim is actually, there's an exemplar from history in that story. Esther, or as she was known, Hadassah. It's a story. It's actually a long story, but so I'm drinking a Tullamore Dew,
Oh,
Irish whiskey. So Sláinte and L'chaim. What are you drinking?
I am drinking a local distillery. I think the distillery is called Misunderstood. They're a Detroit.
I'm sorry,
but yes. It's a ginger spiced bourbon.
Oh, nice. Well,
it's very good. We discovered it at the the Detroit whiskey tasting festival thing. It was one of Tracy's favorites when we were there, and I spotted it at a liquor store a week or so ago and got it, and it's good, very good.
Cool.
So yes, cheers, Sláinte.
Cheers, Sláinte, L'chaim. So
Tasty.
March is Women's History Month.
Yes.
Why, some people ask, is it necessary to have a Women's History Month? The same way people ask in February, why is it necessary to have a Black History Month? And the reason is that the history of women, just like the history of the contributions of Black people, has been so often overlooked. History has often
downright covered up by men.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Exactly. So the history has often been the history of white men.
Yes.
And the history of white European men, at least as it's taught in, or the history of white American men as it's taught in American schools. And so I was explaining to somebody once who said, well, why is there a pride parade or a pride? Why is it called that? Why shouldn't there be a straight pride or white pride or all that? So, well, because pride here is the opposite of pride here is shame, and that people were taught to be embarrassed or ashamed or something about who they were and what they and who they honestly were. And this is saying, no, we are not. We are who we are. So it's honesty. It's exemplifying honesty. And the same way, Women's History Month is saying, hey, here's stuff that's been overlooked, and so needs to be mentioned and should be mentioned. And if it were part of the ongoing everyday curriculum in history, it would not, maybe there wouldn't be a need for it, but it isn't. So here we are.
Right. History. And I mean, the lots of contributions. It's very interesting and very refreshing to see many sort of historic dramas of movies coming out lately, like and I can't now. I'm blacking out on the blacking out. I'm blanking out on the titles of the women that worked in the space program.
Yes,
I don't remember
yes.
the title now, but
Who contributed, who were the mathematicians behind
yeah, right.
the space program. Yeah.
Uh, yeah, that's that. We're seeing more and more of those kinds of movies coming out, and I
Yes.
think it's fantastic because
I
it's a
agree.
huge piece that's been missing.
We're also seeing a backlash in the President Biden just named a nominee to the Supreme Court, who is an African American woman.
Oh, that's been
Very,
coming for a couple of weeks.
yes, but very qualified. And of course, the bullshit coming from people saying, well, this is tokenism and this is, you know what? Hey, shut up. You know,
yeah, right.
This is
right.
It's about time. So yeah. So
yeah, she wasn't nominated because she's a black woman. She was nominated because she's super qualified and happens to be a black woman.
Yes.
And you can put that in the positive column as far as I'm concerned, but it's not what qualifies her for the bench.
No, and it's true that
unlike Amy Coney Barrett,
never tried a case before the Supreme Court, wasn't a judge, didn't, not at all. Her only qualification is being an arch conservative.
Right.
That was her
only. She's an evangelical,
and she was the 27 days to name her where they denied
they denied Obama 8 months.
Until the next election. So
yeah,
that was ridiculous. But you can't shame people for their hypocrisy if they have no sense of shame. So
right.
So we have a list of virtues that we've gone over. Our very first episodes, if you haven't watched those, you can go back and see how we came up with our list, and then we dive into each virtue individually. But when looking at those and looking at exemplars of the virtues for women, you had a really interesting
I observed point. You came up with a half a dozen that were very spot on for many of the virtues, and they're women that stand out as exemplars of these virtues. But as I was looking at our other virtues in our list, it occurred to me that, well, a lot of these other virtues are kind of what we have traditionally expected women to exemplify anyway. So for example, I mean, your list includes justice, veritas, fortitude, prowess, things that we might have traditionally associated with the male gender, and things like courtesy, propriety, humility, civility, moderation have we traditionally expected women to have those traits. So it's harder to think of a really sterling exemplar, because almost all women are exemplars of those things.
Yeah, and
it'd be easier to find someone who fails utterly in one or two of those in the news.
Well, and we've certainly
do that.
We've certainly talked about that. In fact, I recently watched the Netflix series Inventing Anna.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Which is somewhat fictionalized account based on a true story of a young woman who was a grifter, who was a con artist, who managed to fool the elites of New York society and finance to believe she was a German heiress and wealthy, and she was not. And it was frightening and fascinating, because it was, I think, the obsession with a version of fame, of internet fame, of social media fame was I found disturbing. The enlightening part was it actually was further evidence of something that F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote. Let me tell you about the very rich. They're different from you and me. They possess and enjoy early, and it does something to them, makes them soft where we are hard, and cynical where we are useful, in a way that, unless you were born rich, it's very difficult to understand. F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote that. And I found that the very rich that she conned, she managed to fool just by creating a story and dressing right and acting the part.
Yeah, and she was able to, well, it's a factor of privilege, right? Where these people, the circles she moved in, they all trusted each other to be rich and privileged. And so they bestowed privilege the way they would expect it to be bestowed upon them. They don't have to follow regular people rules. They don't have to meet these criteria because you've got all this money. And yes, of course, your father, you're sending a wire. It's a, wire transfer is messed up. Yes, I know. I understand. This happens all the time. It's fine. And she could string them along by preying on, in some ways, their assumption that she was what she said she was. She managed to fool them enough, and it built into a and maybe this was part of the fictionalized part of it, but the people once fooled were embarrassed to admit it, and that allowed her to go even further.
Yes. And so, but we're not talking about that except as a bad example.
Yeah.
An
right.
example
sure.
of, right.
Although I will say about that movie, they managed to make her slightly sympathetic, in that she wasn't just trying to, or at least it was presented in such a way that she wasn't trying to just get a bunch of money and run. She was actually trying to make something. She was trying, and she said over and over again, she was trying to build something.
But she believed that.
And as long as she believed it, to me, if she honestly, and that's what I'm saying, that they managed to make her somewhat sympathetic, is if she honestly believed that that's what she was doing, how she was going about it was completely unethical. I don't get me wrong.
They managed to make her somewhat sympathetic, and I have a problem with that. And even afterwards, there were people who were, and still are, she has an active social media account, the real person, and is followed and has fans, and think, no, she's horrible.
Oh, we have a very twisted celebrity culture in this country.
Yeah.
But my point was only that she wasn't just going to take all this money and disappear, right? She was trying to put something together. And as I said, in every unethical way, she lied, she obfuscated, she took advantage of her friends, she did terrible, terrible things. But she was led to it, I think, by society. The fake it till you make it. Once you've made it, and it doesn't matter how you made it. Lie, cheat, steal, take what you can, steal where you got to. As long as you win in the end, you still won.
Well, that's why people who use auto-tune can be successful recording artists.
Well, people are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year filming themselves watching other people's videos. So you can explain that one to me.
No.
Okay, good. Good. We're on the same page there.
So let's go to some of the, and I think your point is well taken, that certain virtues were traditionally expected of women, but not others. Whereas certain virtues traditionally were expected of men, but not others. And when we've talked about the virtues, we've talked about this is what it takes to be a good person, to be a good man, a good woman, a mensch, a good person, no matter what your gender expression, on the spectrum of gender expression, whatever, be a good person, a good human being. So some of the first example that I thought of in terms of, and I came up with two examples for prowess, one in art and one military. And the first one,
another military one that leaped to
what's
mind.
that?
I thought of another military one.
Okay.
Too,
the first one that occurred to me in art was Artemisia Gentileschi. And she occurred to me because there's a show at the Detroit Institute of Arts, which I have to get to see while it's still there, about Artemisia Gentileschi and her other women artists. She was lived in the 17th century in Italy, was very accomplished, initially worked in the style of Caravaggio, developed her own style. So a lot of, and very dramatic. Her subject matters were often women from myths, from allegory, from the Bible, and really dramatic, very naturalistic, excellent use of color. And she was initially considered a curiosity. But it was only later, it's been recently that she's, and hence the show at the Detroit Institute of Arts, considered an exceptionally good painter for anyone, not just a good girl painter, but she was brilliant. She was tremendously accomplished. She was selling professional work by the time she was 15.
Oh.
Yeah, amazingly accomplished. So
I wonder
an example.
I wonder if she had to, in her time, had to hide that she was a female artist.
I don't. She didn't at the time, and maybe they bought from her because she was a curiosity, but she had international clients. I mean, it was not just confined to Italy. First woman to become a member of the Accademia di Arte del Disegno, so the Academy of Painters in Italy. So very accomplished. Certainly there are others. She came to mind because of the show at the DIA, but certainly there are others who we could mention. George O'Keeffe and Margaret Borkwhite, photographer, and lots of examples of prowess in art and the arts.
Yes.
And certainly if we don't limit it to visual arts, there's the written word, and there's performance art, and there's performance-based art, and all sorts of things.
Yeah. Now you had a military exemplar.
Yes. Marguerite d'Anjou, who was the wife of King Henry VI. She led the, she commanded the Lancastrian faction during the War of the Roses because Henry was ill.
Mm-hmm.
And she actually she was described, this woman excelled all other as well in beauty and favor as in wit and policy, and was of stomach and courage more like to a man than a woman.
Right. And there we have it.
There we have it.
Exactly what you're talking about.
Right. That courage traditionally expected of man, but she demonstrated it, which just goes to show that the virtues are, anyone is capable of the virtues, and the virtues are expected of everyone.
Yes. Yeah. The virtues are universal, at least in the way we have approached it.
Yes.
The one I thought of immediately for prowess was Um, and it's a little weird at this particular point in time, but Lyudmila Pavlichenko was a Russian sniper in World War II. There's a whole movie, the Battle of Sevastopol, Battle for Sevastopol, is I think available on Netflix now. It's riveting movie about particularly about this woman. She's one of the most decorated soldiers in the history of Soviet Russia. So and that is absolute personal prowess on the battlefield. That's not commanding, that's not policy making, that's fighting and killing. So
and it is a little weird now given the situation with Russia, but hey, back she was killing Nazis, so
that's right. Yeah,
good
World War
her.
II, she was
Yeah.
Can't go wrong killing a Nazi.
like Aldo, the character, the Brad Pitt character in Inglourious Bastards. I'm Lieutenant Aldo Rain.
Yep.
We got one business here.
Killing Nazis.
Yeah. Great fantasy story. I wish it was true, but story. So fortitude. I came up with an exemplar of fortitude. Malala.
Yeah, and I wasn't familiar with this woman.
Malala Yousafzai. Malala, she's often known just by Malala. She was born in Pakistan. She was an activist even as a teenager. Her father was an educator, and she spoke out publicly about the education of girls. So when she was 11 years old, she gave her first speech to a local press club. How dare the Taliban take away my basic right to education? And her speech was publicized throughout Pakistan. And she kept being an activist, and she
probably got away with that speech because she was 11.
Well, she gained global attention when she survived an assassination attempt when she was 15.
Wow.
A member of the was it a group sometimes referred to as the Pakistani Taliban, shot her in the face, and she survived. She and another woman went on to jointly win the Nobel Peace Prize in recognition of their efforts for the education of girls and children's rights. And so she won the Nobel Prize. She persisted, which, and yet she persisted.
Yeah,
is a phrase that Mitch McConnell used about Elizabeth Warren.
Yes,
who was speaking, and he kept telling her to.
She was reading a letter from Martin Luther King Jr.'s wife,
and
he told her to stop, and she wouldn't.
Yeah, she persisted. And that's persistence is very closely related to fortitude. There are certainly any number of people who would have been intimidated into silence, and yet she was not. So I think she's an example of fortitude.
And as you listed here, speaking of teenage activists, Greta Thunberg.
And Greta Thunberg, and that's the thing with these exemplars, and the thing we've talked about with virtues. They don't stand out singly. They're closely related to each other. So Greta Thunberg, I think, is an example of franchise, because she saw something that could be done and did it. But she did it with such persistence and fortitude that it made a difference. So
she did it. She started out as it was a personal thing for her. I mean,
yes,
just she sat with a sign in front of a official building.
in outside the Swedish parliament,
Right. That's right.
calling
And
for stronger action on climate change.
for months, that was just her. She would be there, just sitting there by herself with a sign.
And then eventually that grew into students doing similar protests elsewhere. And in 2019,
Well, didn't she, as just sitting there by herself for week after week after week, didn't she finally like get interviewed
yes,
by
I think
by a
so.
local TV station, and that
Yep.
sort of springboarded her up and started snowballing into a larger movement.
And eventually there were multiple coordinated protests in multiple cities with millions of students protesting and calling for action, not just protesting, calling for
Right.
action on climate change. And she spoke to the 2019 UN Climate Action Summit at the United Nations. And her speech was very widely publicized. And she said to them, how dare you do this to the world and take away all our future.
What I found of her and her speeches and her interviews and so on is that she's not particularly eloquent. She is infinitely passionate
and very direct.
Yeah, right. That's what I mean. I don't know her. She's convincing only in that she has no there's no grace to it. It's just this is how I feel and what you need to hear.
Yeah, it is speaking truth to power.
Right.
So
and powerfully spoken, even though, like I say, she's not what I would consider eloquent, but she is passionate, and it shows in everything she says.
And she certainly does have a command of the facts as well.
Oh, well, yes, yeah. Absolutely.
So,
and it was, of course, the conservative pundits in this country are ridiculing her. And I'm like, fuck you.
Exactly.
She's a teenage girl. She's doing something for the good of the world. Shut up. How dare you? How dare you?
How dare you? Yeah. Well, then there are those same pundits now are talking heads, pundits, whatever you want to call them. I refuse to call them news people or journalists.
No, well, by most of their own admissions, they aren't news people.
They're
lawyers
saying
so.
They're lying. It's not just they're lying now about Ukraine, saying that there were bioweapon labs in Ukraine, and that's why Russia had to invade. Fuck you.
That's all Russian propaganda.
Yeah. And Ukraine was dismantling Soviet biofacilities, but they're gone. They're done. And they were Soviet biofacilities. If there were some, other than that, they're pharmaceutical research facilities. But yeah, it's completely made up. And the Russian pretext, and when the reasons or the pretext for something changes, but the actions remain the same, that there's a lie.
Oh yeah.
So, they will greet us like liberators.
Right.
Oh, they're weapons of mass destruction. Where have we heard that before? Yeah. This was absolutely the same bullshit that was the pretext for the war in Iraq.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so it's the same thing. Speaking of honesty, as a virtue veritas, Fiona Hill was, she was, let's see, she's a European and Russian expert
Yeah, she teaches
It was in
experts.
the, what's that?
She teaches experts.
Yes, she was senior director for European and Russian affairs on the National Security Council.
Yep.
She was national intelligence officer for Russia and Eurasia at the National Intelligence Council. And she testified at Trump's first impeachment about what the truth of the quid pro quo, that he was trying to blackmail Ukraine to aid Trump's reelection campaign.
Right.
And I think she is eloquent. Well, she's got several decades of eloquence experience on
but she's also when she speaks, in many ways unvarnished.
Yes,
which I think is very
well, and
makes her more powerful.
I think that that's part of the intelligence community. That's what they are supposed to do.
It's not always welcome in front of Congress, though.
Or yeah, it's not always welcome, but that is Veritas, and speaking truth to power in that way requires courage as well. And
well, we've said over and over again that many of that courage is inherent in exercising many of the virtues.
Yes, absolutely. And for justice, I immediately thought of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who literally was a justice of the Supreme Court. Great example of fortitude as well. But she spent her legal career before the Supreme Court advocating for gender equality and women's rights. Until she was finally named to the Supreme Court. She argued in front of the Supreme Court. It was her strategy for doing it was fascinating in that many of the cases she argued, she looked at laws and took the position that the law was unconstitutional because it was limiting men's rights. And when those laws were struck down, it created greater women's rights and gender equality as well. It was really brilliant too. So those are some examples. There are so many more. So many more. Those are just some that came to mind.
Yeah, and like I said, the other virtues, we have felt we are compelled to adopt these virtues to be, well, as we said, well-rounded, chivalrous people, right? But it isn't really for us, I don't think, but I think that culturally it's a stretch. It's men need to push themselves to adopt these other, I don't want to call them softer virtues because many of them are difficult. The courtesy and propriety and humility, and that we aren't, as Americans, men aren't taught those things.
And we mentioned before that the Boy Scouts were founded by neo-medievalists in the Victorian era, Baden-Powell and others, specifically to teach all of those virtues, those chivalric virtues, to young boys. And it's not, there is a term in industry referred to as soft skills. So hard skills are the technical skills somebody would have, but soft skills is a term that's used to refer to things like not being a dick to people you work with, right? Being able to being courteous, being
Politic.
patient, being, well, but politic, not
Yes.
politics.
Not,
Yeah.
or not
So,
political, but
right.
being
But,
politic.
and diplomatic and
Hmm.
those sorts of things. So,
Works well with others.
yeah, I knew someone who um, she worked for a company in New York, and one of the things they valued were her soft skills that they referred to as Midwest nice, um, which I thought was kind of funny, but yeah. So the that traditionally those virtues were you're right, they were expected of women, and other virtues are expected of men. But what we've argued for and what we've talked about throughout the entire history of this podcast
Yeah, long,
is
long ago, back into the early days of 2 years ago.
yeah, is that, is it only 2 years ago?
No, well, it was the end of 2018 when we started.
Yeah, is really that these are things that anyone can do, and if you do them all, practice them all, and they take practice and work, then you have
Sprezzatura.
sprezzatura. Exactly. You knew that
Yes,
had to come in there somewhere.
yes. And again, that's one of those things, like I find women, in my experience, I have found women achieve a level of sprezzatura much easier and much more often than men. And I think it has to do with men are are um, are self-conscious in their masculinity, and it makes being accepting of one's own self more difficult. And
That's,
part of that is what sprezzatura allows you to do that.
oh, that's really interesting. I did have way back when in the SCA, before I was knighted, I did have a knight tell me, and he meant as words of encouragement, it's easier for a gentleman to has to learn swordplay to become a knight than it is for a barbarian swordsman who has to learn to become a gentleman to become a knight. And I thought that was interesting, and it was his way of encouraging me, but it was meant to say that the soft skills, those interpersonal skills, those virtues that we've been talking about, of courtesy and humility and propriety,
right, moderation,
so on, are are part of being a gentleman.
right.
What
Yeah.
used to be thought of as, I remember, good citizenship grade in elementary school. So,
But good citizenship included a sort of blind patriotism and you know, respect for authority and all of that. So there was a lot lumped into good citizenship.
yeah, there was
when we were in
it was
school.
very open to interpretation by the teacher, because I don't remember ever seeing a well-defined rubric in elementary school or high school, for that matter, and not always in college either. So,
Well, I think we have sufficiently covered this. This is going to be one of our shorter episodes, but
yeah, well, it's either going to be one of our shorter episodes, or we're going to talk for the next 6 hours about
yes,
all the amazing women throughout history.
Well, and we couldn't possibly cover it.
Hidden Figures, that was the name of the movie.
Hidden Figures, yes, thank you. Which is a little shady title for me.
Well, it's just potentially a double entendre in
Yeah,
that
exactly.
that they're figures, they're calculations, were hidden, but also their
Yeah, the
persons.
fact that they have figures. Yeah.
So, yeah, but yeah, we could talk for, oh, maybe we should devote an entire month to women's history. What a good idea. We could call it,
It's been done. It's been done.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe we could spend another 2 hours talking about going to daylight savings time permanently. But let's not do that. That's
if we did that, we would then talk about going to just 2 time zones in the United States. And then we would talk about going to a standard 28-day calendar with a leap week at the end of it every year.
like that's just a bacchanal, right? That leap week is just nobody works, everybody parties. It's the
yeah,
and like the purge.
The purge, exactly. As
Maybe
it
this is a
is,
non-violent sort of purge, you know.
yes. More of a binge than a purge.
Yeah, there we go. There we go. The purge comes after the.
So, not to joke about eating disorders, though. So,
No.
okay.
You can do those things without having a disorder. I mean, that's just a really good weekend.
Yeah, I think we're done.
Yeah, I have to agree there.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, and I finished my drink, so that's a good excuse to go leave. The parting glass, so to speak.
Yeah, I just listened to a couple of different recordings of the parting glass. One, it's a excuse me, great song. Hosier did a great rendition, and because I am drinking Tullamore Dew, there's a Tullamore Dew commercial that I really like, where they're 4 friends walking in the rain and stop outside a church, and they're singing the parting glass, and when they all raise a glass to my brother Jerry, and then it turns out Jerry's getting married, and so he's not dead, he's getting married, and so that was the twist on it. But it's breaking up the gang apparently. But it was a great commercial for
it is a very good traditional song that can be interpreted several ways.
Yeah.
But we won't sing it. We aren't going to sing it for you people.
And with that,
okay.
Thank you. Please like, follow, share, subscribe. Send us suggestions for subjects you'd like us to talk about. And
yeah, we could really use some more suggestions for things to talk about.
And with that, until next time, be thou.
Be thou.
Be
okay,
thou.
are you going to do it or am I going to do it?
I'll do it.
Okay. Now, go.
Be thou
a good night
and true.